Human stem cell treatments are only just emerging in clinical trials, but man's best friend is already benefiting from pain relief and important treatments that are commercialized. And this work in dogs and cats could actually one day benefit human patients. Welcome to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Bruce Japsen, the healthcare reporter with the Chicago Tribune, and joining me today is Dr. Robert Harman. He's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of VetStem. Dr. Harman has more than 15 years of experience as a chief executive and biotechnology entrepreneur. He is a veterinarian and statistician and has overseen the completion of more than 1,000 contract research projects in his career for the development of veterinary and human biotechnology products. He has led the following companies: HTI Bioservices, a contract research company; HTI Bioproducts, a biological reagent and antibody production company; and Animal Health Ventures, a veterinary product licensing company. And he joins us today from his offices in sunny San Diego, California. Dr. Robert Harman, welcome to ReachMD Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it is great to have you here because I followed your company and wrote an article in the Tribune about this. And VetStem, while you guys for a year, tell us a little bit about the product that you're developing, and then we can go into talking about its application in humans.
You bet, Bruce. And you did, by the way, an excellent article in the Tribune that got picked up in a lot of places because this is such an interesting topic to the public that stem cells can actually be used. Our technology was really licensed out of the human field from both the University of Pittsburgh and University of California, Los Angeles, where they had done the early developmental work to show there were true adult stem cells in fat. A tissue that we all have excess of, including our canine buddies walking around and even our equine partners. So fat's a really ubiquitous tissue. Everybody has some, and there are huge amounts of stem cells, these adult stem cells, that we carry around in our bodies every day, and that's how we actually repair our own injuries every day. So you're your own donor in the natural sense that if you sit down and twist your ankle, or you get a fracture, or you get a bad injury of some kind, these stem cells come out of fat and other tissues to do the repair. And all we've done is try to figure out how to harness this sort of natural healing process and extract these stem cells from a small sample of fat and then give them back to a veterinarian who can inject them, for example, in the joint of a dog that has bad arthritis, maybe from hip dysplasia or from just old age wear and tear. So in short, Bruce, that's kind of how this works. It really is quite a simple concept, but it took a lot of years to discover that we had these kinds of cells sitting in a tissue like fat that we thought was just sort of a throwaway tissue. It was hanging out there. It turns out it's a very important tissue, and so those little love handles that you have, you can say those are my stem cell reservoir.
That's great. And so tell us, our listeners, about how this is working. I mean, you guys have been selling your product or processing the animal's fat, if you will, for a little over a year, and give us an idea of what the market is out there.
Yeah, and actually we've been just a little over a year in the dog market. We actually started in 2003, and since then we've treated over 3,500 horses all over the U.S., or I should say our client veterinarians have. We just provide the processing service. So there's now over 3,500 horses that have been treated for tendon, ligament, and arthritis injuries in the horse world, and it works so well. Something over 70% of those animals return to their prior level of work, whether they're a jumper or they're a racehorse. They have some kind of a job they do every day. And so we got pushed to try this out in dogs because there's something like on the order of 10 times as many dogs in the U.S. as horses. There's over 65 million dogs in the U.S., and about 25% of them have some degree of significant arthritis. And so it's a big market and a lot of animals out there. And so we got pushed to try it, and over the last few years we did clinical trials that have now been published in peer-reviewed journals showing that these cells really work in a blinded, placebo-controlled study of arthritis in the hip of dogs. And so we started last January, a year ago January, treating our first dogs commercially. And in less than a year, the dog business has now eclipsed the horse business. So in the last year, we treated nearly 1,500 dogs that have arthritis, and that's with veterinarians from all over the U.S.
And what a lot of people might not understand, I mean, even perhaps our physician listeners, is that while there isn't a product like this on the market for humans, it is being researched. You had mentioned some of your academic partners, and if you could tell us a little bit about the research and, quite frankly, the similarities that exist between, say, dogs and humans, which would show potential down the road.
You bet, Bruce. It's really a good question and a good comment. If you look at arthritis in a German Shepherd that's playing in your backyard, that is no different than the same kind of arthritis you get in your hip. It's wear and tear in the joint. Sometimes it's a conformation problem, but it really is wear and tear and this ongoing pain and arthritis in the joint. So our human colleagues actually pay a lot of attention to what we see in the veterinary world because we see real, true clinical patients. These are not, a laboratory model or a research model of disease. This is the real thing. So when dogs get arthritis or dogs get liver failure or dogs get kidney failure, it really is, in most cases, very similar to what our human MD colleagues see in their clinics. So it's a really good window to the future. Currently, I think there's probably a dozen clinical trials going on specifically in areas that are related to what we're talking about of stem cells from fat around the world and in the U.S., people starting to use these cells in real clinical trials to see how it works. Heart disease is probably one of the first in the human because it's such a gigantic market and such a real problem. But now we're seeing people in the orthopedics area, both in Europe for reconstructive surgery, for example, for women that have had breast cancer and now have to have reconstructive surgery, that we see these stem cells from fat tissue, from adipose, which is another name for fat tissue, being used in those clinical trials. So it's actually moving ahead quite rapidly. And if you think about it, the safety profile is so good because you're your own donor. Bruce, if you tore your knee, your cruciate ligament this weekend playing softball, as a weekend warrior, and you could go in and get a small amount of fat taken and get your knee injected, one, you don't reject it because it's your own stem cells. Two, you're not going to get any diseases you don't already have. And three, it's from a regulatory standpoint much, much safer. So people at the FDA and people in companies look at this and using adult stem cells, meaning and from yourself, are so much safer, and they'll be the early successes we have in the clinic in just the very near future.
Well, if you're just joining us, or even if you're new to our channel, you're listening to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. I'm Bruce Japsen, the healthcare reporter with the Chicago Tribune, and joining me today is Dr. Robert Harman, who's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of VetStem. Now, VetStem is a San Diego-based company that has products on the market where animal fat is being processed and turned into stem cells that are being used to treat dogs, cats, and horses with joint problems like hip dysplasia. But what we're just talking about are the applications for humans. And Dr. Harman, if you could, tell our listeners, how far off is this for use in humans? And quite frankly, how did it get this far in animals first?
So the reason this technology has advanced so fast is because you're using, again, cells from the patient themselves. So you aren't creating a product in a bottle that has the really rigorous FDA review and that you have to worry about diseases and rejection and all the other issues. And because it's quite easy to do, it's been economical to do in the veterinary profession. And if I could digress for a second and sort of describe for the listener how this actually happens. So if you have, for example, you've got a golden retriever, and he has a knee problem, so he's got knee arthritis from having an injury before, and so now he's limping around, and the pain medications don't work so well. So you would go to your veterinarian. If your veterinarian has already taken our online course, everything they do is sort of traditional veterinary medicine. They need to take a course to understand what stem cells are about, but it's quite a simple procedure for them. They take a small amount of fat in a procedure that's very similar to a spay or a neuter. So it's a very short anesthesia. They collect a small amount of fat from underneath the skin, goes in a sterile tube by FedEx overnight to San Diego, and our laboratory here in San Diego takes that fat out and processes it in about a 3-hour procedure to get rid of the fat and end up with, at the end of the day, a very concentrated little pellet of regenerative and stem cells. We put that in a syringe, ship it back for injection the next day back into the knee of your golden retriever. Then those cells go to work reducing the inflammation, trying to get the joint, instead of to be degenerative, to be regenerative. So it induces the formation of cartilage, reduces all the inflammation and swelling, and also helps actually produce some of the molecules that help lubricate the joint. So in a really short procedure that really only takes 48 hours from the first surgery until the injection into the joint in the animal, you can be treating this animal. If the animal was actually right next door to our lab, it could be a same-day procedure, which is what they're working on in the human, so that now our colleagues that have the ability to do liposuction could, right in the operating theater, be able to extract these stem cells and put them into, for example, a joint. Or another example would be in trying to do a spinal fusion where you've had a fracture or an unstable spine. And there's actually a company working on that right now to be able to take those in the same operation at which they stabilize the vertebrae and put plates in there. They would extract the fat right there, process it. An hour later, those cells go right back into the injury to help make new bone and stabilize that spine. So both for the human and for the veterinary, the fact that we can do it rapidly and sort of at the patient side or within a very short period of time without having to grow the cells is a huge advantage, and it really is the reason why that is becoming very prominent in the world. And there are human patients being treated in Korea, Japan, China, and other locations already commercially, and in Europe in clinical trials as we speak for heart disease, and I believe there's a new study about to start looking at kidney failure.
And what are the companies that are involved on the human side? I know that Satori, which is also in San Diego, they're looking at this in breast reconstruction, and I think they have a product where this is being used in Europe. Could you mention some of the companies?
They do. Satori was one of the first companies to come out with one of these devices to do the processing, similar to what we do in our laboratory here in San Diego. They have a device that rolls into the operating room and does the same processing, the digestion, rinsing, spinning, and concentrating these cells. And they're in clinical trials in Europe right now in heart disease. So, for example, if you had a heart attack and you were right next to the proper hospital that was participating in this clinical trial, while you were literally on the table getting your angiogram done, the same catheter that runs up into the heart to put the dye for the diagnostic work could be used then to administer these cells from your own fat to immediately help blocking the injury in the heart and starting the repair process literally almost immediately. So that's being done as we speak in clinical trials in Europe, and that company is Satori Therapeutics here in San Diego. The second company in the U.S. working in the same area is a company called Articell, and they're based in Baltimore, and they're owned by a venture capital firm by the name of Toucan Capital, and they own all the licensing rights from University of Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh the regenerative center there was one of the first places in the world to actually do this discovery that these cells were in fat. The third company in the U.S. is a company in Hawaii, of all places, almost as sunny as San Diego today, and it's a company called Tissue Genesis. And they also have an operating room machine that allows the physician to do the liposuction and the processing of the cells right in the operating room. So those three companies in the U.S. are progressing rapidly down the clinical trial path, both in and out of the U.S. There are also companies in Korea, Japan, and I believe one company in Europe now working in the same technology area.
How far off do you think treatments like these will be in patients in the United States where, like I say, fat is extracted from someone and then shipped off and it turns around in a day or so for treatment for someone?
So it's always a good question, Bruce, and it's subject, obviously, to FDA regulation here, and there are companies have applications in, and they're working down that pathway. I'm guessing in the U.S. we could be still a few years away. Europe probably is a little closer. We might actually have European locations within the next year or so, a location in Israel. So the company I told you, Articell from Baltimore, actually is treating commercial patients in Israel right now, so you don't have to go all the way to China to get treated. But I would guess in the next 2 to 4 years in the U.S., we'll have formal approvals of these kinds of stem cells and be treating patients right here in the States.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Robert Harman, who's been our guest. He's the CEO of VetStem, which is already using fat cells from animals, dogs, cats, and horses, to turn around and make stem cell treatments to help these animals with their arthritis, their hip dysplasia. And this company is also working with human stem cell companies and things that are entering human trials and becoming real treatments at certain places around the world. So I'd like to thank Dr. Harman, who's been our guest. My name is Bruce Japsen. I'm the healthcare reporter with the Chicago Tribune, and you've been listening to ReachMD Radio on XM 160, the channel for medical professionals. ReachMD online, on demand, and on the air. Please visit us at reachmd.com, and I'd like to thank you today for listening.